quietly deleted all his posts about America after hearing what President Trump did to the Venezuelan president and his wife. Now, let me tell you. Good evening, and we have a fascinating story unfolding that connects Nigerian Islamic scholar Sheikh Gumi to the dramatic events happening in Venezuela right now. If you've been on social media today, you might have seen headlines claiming that Sheikh Gumi quietly deleted all his posts about America after hearing what President Trump did to the Venezuelan president and his wife. Now, let me tell you what's really going on here, because this story has several interesting layers that you need to understand. Sheikh Gumi, the controversial cleric from Kaduna, who never hesitates to speak his mind on political matters, made headlines back in late December 2024 when he called on President Bola Tinubu's government to immediately halt all military cooperation with the United States. According to Daily Post Nigeria's report from December 26th, the sheikh was responding to what he described as Trump's aggressive airstrikes and military actions around the world. He didn't mince words at all, stating that Nigeria should take a firm stance against American military interventionism and cut ties with U.S. defense partnerships. This was a bold statement coming from a religious leader, directly telling our government to reconsider one of its most important international relationships. Now, here's where things get interesting. Fast forward to today, January 3rd, 2026, and something dramatic has happened in Venezuela that seems to have caught everyone's attention, including possibly Sheikh Gumi's. Multiple explosions rocked Caracas, Venezuela's capital city, specifically near the Simón Bolívar International Airport and military installations in the Maiquetía area. These weren't small incidents either. We're talking about significant explosions near critical infrastructure that have sent shockwaves through the international community. The Venezuelan government, led by President Nicolás Maduro, immediately pointed fingers at the United States, claiming these were deliberate attacks on their sovereignty orchestrated by American forces. Defense Minister Vladimir Padrino Lopez came out strong, calling them terrorist attacks targeting both civilian and military infrastructure. He painted a picture of Venezuela under siege from external forces, specifically naming the United States as the aggressor. The rhetoric from Caracas has been fierce, with officials describing this as an act of war against their nation. They are claiming that America is trying to destabilize their country just days before Maduro's presidential inauguration, which is a serious accusation with potentially serious consequences. The timing of all this is absolutely crucial to understanding this story. Venezuela is just days away from Maduro's presidential inauguration, scheduled for January 10th, an event that much of the international community views as illegitimate given the contested elections that supposedly put him back in power. Many countries, including the United States, don't recognize Maduro's claim to the presidency, which creates this complex situation where you have a government that half the world doesn't accept as legitimate, now accusing a superpower of attacking them. The explosions today have raised the political temperature significantly, with accusations flying and tensions escalating between Caracas and Washington in ways we haven't seen in quite some time. Now back to Sheikh Gumi and these claims about deleted posts that have everyone talking. The viral headline that's been spreading like wildfire on social media suggests that after seeing what Trump allegedly did in Venezuela, the sheikh suddenly went silent and scrubbed his social media clean of anti-American comments. People are saying he got scared, that he realized he might have bitten off more than he could chew by speaking against American power. But here's what we need to understand about this situation and why it matters so much. While it's absolutely true that Gumi made strong statements against U.S. military cooperation in December, calling for Nigeria to distance itself from American partnerships and criticizing what he saw as aggressive military actions by the Trump administration, there's a big question mark over whether he actually deleted these posts in response to today's Venezuela situation. Social media has been absolutely buzzing with speculation since this headline started circulating. People are sharing screenshots, making claims, and creating narratives, but the truth might be more complicated than the viral story suggests. If you're enjoying this breakdown of what's really happening behind these headlines and want to stay informed about stories that matter, both internationally and here at home in Nigeria, make sure you hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. We're committed to bringing you the real story behind the sensational claims, helping you understand what's actually going on versus what gets shared for clicks and engagement. Let's talk about what we can actually verify. Sheikh Gumi's original statement back in December was bold and unambiguous. There's no question about that. He directly told the Tinubu government to halt all military cooperation with the United States immediately, citing what he called Trump's aggressive airstrikes and military actions. For a religious leader to make such a direct political statement about foreign policy shows how significant he viewed the matter. This wasn't a casual comment or offhand remark during a sermon. This was a deliberate, pointed statement aimed at Nigeria's government and its relationship with one of the world's most powerful nations. Sheikh Gumi has always positioned himself as someone willing to speak truth to power, whether people agree with him or not. He's been involved in controversial negotiations with bandits in the Northwest, he's made statements about government policies that have sparked heated debates across the country, and he's never been afraid of backlash from any quarter. This is a man who has sat down with armed criminals to negotiate for hostages, who has criticized government security strategies openly, and who regularly makes statements that generate both support and criticism in equal measure. So what really happened in Venezuela that might have prompted this alleged deletion? According to CNN's live coverage today, the explosions near Caracas airport and military bases have created a serious international incident that diplomats and analysts are scrambling to understand the implications. The Venezuelan government is calling it an act of war, using the strongest possible language to describe what happened. They are claiming this is proof of American aggression and imperialism, using the incident to rally domestic support and international sympathy. The United States has not confirmed any involvement in any attacks whatsoever, leaving a gap between accusation and confirmation that creates space for speculation and propaganda. This is classic geopolitical tension, where accusations are made but concrete evidence takes time to emerge, if it emerges at all. Venezuela and the US have had a hostile relationship for years now, spanning multiple administrations in both countries. American sanctions have been crippling Venezuela's economy, destroying their oil industry and making daily life extremely difficult for ordinary Venezuelans. The Maduro government, for its part, has consistently accused Washington of trying to orchestrate regime change, pointing to American support for opposition figures and the refusal to recognize election results. The situation is particularly sensitive because President Trump, who took office on January 20, 2025, has a well-documented history of taking hardline positions on Venezuela. During his previous term from 2017 to 2021, his administration imposed some of the toughest sanctions Venezuela had ever faced and took the unprecedented step of recognizing opposition leader Juan Guaido as the legitimate president, directly challenging Maduro's authority and creating a bizarre situation where different countries recognized different people as Venezuela's leader. Now that Trump is back in power, many observers expected renewed pressure on Venezuela, but explosions near the capital take things to a different and more dangerous level. For Sheikh Gumi, if he indeed made the decision to delete his anti-American posts, it would represent a significant and surprising shift in his approach. Don't forget to subscribe to catch more analysis like this. This is a man known for standing by his statements regardless of controversy or pressure. So what would make him reconsider and backtrack? Perhaps seeing the actual consequences of what confronting American military power looks like gave him serious pause for thought. Perhaps he received pressure from within Nigeria, where the government maintains critically important security partnerships with the United States that help us fight terrorism and banditry. Or perhaps, and this is equally possible, the deletion story is overblown and exaggerated. His posts remain intact somewhere, and what we're seeing is social media doing what it does best, creating dramatic narratives from incomplete information.
Sheikh Ahmad Gumi has come forward with allegations that are shaking Nigeria's political and security landscape right down to its foundations. The renowned Islamic scholar from Kaduna claims he received a phone call from a high-ranking official in Abuja who delivered a chilling message that his name has been placed on a list of individuals marked for elimination through airstrikes, with authorities planning to classify him as a Boko Haram affiliate to justify the action. The cleric vehemently denies any connection to terrorist organizations and is calling on northern leaders and religious scholars to publicly condemn what he describes as deliberate fabrications designed to silence dissenting voices on how Nigeria handles its security challenges. The timing of these allegations could not be more explosive, considering recent development in the country's counter-terrorism efforts. Just days ago, at the end of December, American military aircraft conducted precision strikes in Sokoto state, targeting hideouts linked to ISIS and Boko Haram militants who have terrorized communities across the northwest and northeast for years. These operations were carried out in coordination with Nigerian authorities as part of enhanced cooperation between Abuja and Washington in combating violent extremism. However, the strikes immediately sparked controversy, with critics questioning whether foreign military intervention represents the right approach to addressing homegrown security problems that have complex ethnic, religious, and economic dimensions beyond simple military solutions. Sheikh Gumi emerged as one of the most vocal opponents of the American airstrikes, publicly condemning them as an assault on Muslim communities and questioning the justification for foreign aircraft dropping bombs on Nigerian soil. He argued that Sokoto, being a predominantly Muslim region, did not present the kind of immediate threat that would warrant such aggressive action, and suggested the government should consider alternative partnerships with nations like China or Turkey if external assistance is needed. His criticism resonated with segments of the population who feel that military approaches have failed to address the root causes of insurgency and banditry, while often resulting in civilian casualties that further alienate affected communities from trusting government security forces. Now, with these latest allegations about being personally targeted, the stakes have escalated dramatically, from policy disagreements to questions of life and death. If Sheikh Gumi's claims hold any truth, they would indicate that powerful interests view his activism and criticism as sufficiently threatening to warrant elimination under the guise of counter-terrorism operations. This possibility raises profoundly disturbing questions about how far authorities might go to silence critics and whether the machinery of state security could be weaponized against individuals exercising their constitutional rights to free speech and advocacy. The fact that he specifically mentions being labeled as Boko Haram, despite his well-documented efforts to engage with armed groups through dialogue rather than violence, suggests a calculated strategy to discredit him before taking more drastic action. Understanding Sheikh Gumi requires recognizing his unique and controversial position in Nigeria's security landscape. He has spent years advocating for negotiations with bandits and armed groups in the northwest, arguing that many of these fighters are driven by legitimate grievances about marginalization, poverty, and historical injustices rather than pure criminality or religious extremism. His willingness to venture into forests and meet with these groups has earned him both praise from those who see dialogue as the only sustainable peace and fierce criticism from those who believe he provides legitimacy to criminals and terrorists. Security hawks have long viewed his approach as naive at best and complicit at worst, creating powerful enemies within military and political circles who favor kinetic solutions over negotiated settlements. The American dimension adds another layer of complexity that makes this situation particularly volatile for Nigeria's sovereignty and international relations. President Trump has recently made statements about intensifying efforts against bandits and terrorists in Nigeria, signaling increased American involvement in addressing security challenges that have displaced millions and disrupted economic activity across vast territories. While some Nigerians welcome this support as necessary given the scale of the threat, others view it as neo-colonial interference that undermines national dignity and could lead to the kind of quagmire seen in places like Somalia or Afghanistan, where foreign military presence created as many problems as it solved. If you are following this story and want to catch every development as it unfolds, go ahead and hit that subscribe button right now so you stay informed about conversations that really matter to our nation's future. The silence from northern traditional and religious leaders following Sheikh Gumi's appeal speaks volumes about the delicate position they occupy. These influential figures must balance supporting government security efforts against protecting their communities from what they may perceive as excessive force or misguided strategies. Speaking out in support of Gumi risks being labeled as sympathetic to terrorism, while remaining silent could be interpreted as abandoning a fellow religious leader or tacitly accepting the targeting of critics. Their eventual response will provide crucial insight into whether northern elites can present a unified position on security matters, or whether divisions will allow the government and foreign partners to pursue their preferred approaches without meaningful local pushback. Past incidents of airstrikes hitting civilian targets lend credibility to concerns about how these operations are conducted and whether adequate intelligence gathering precedes them.
Markets, wedding parties, and internally displaced persons camps have all been struck in previous operations that authorities claimed targeted terrorist hideouts, resulting in dozens of civilian deaths that sparked outrage and demands for accountability. The lack of transparent investigations when civilians die in military operations further erodes trust in official assurances that all strikes are carefully planned and executed. What happens next will depend partly on whether any evidence emerges to substantiate these serious claims or whether they remain unverified allegations that authorities dismiss as conspiracy theories from a controversial figure. Sheikh Gumi's supporters will demand investigations and protections, while his critics will likely suggest he is fabricating threats to gain sympathy. The truth probably lies somewhere in the complexity of a security environment where multiple actors pursue conflicting agendas and ordinary Nigerians struggle to discern fact from propaganda while staying safe. Drop your perspective in the comments about whether you think dialogue or military force represents the better path forward for addressing our security challenges, and smash that like button to help more people see this important discussion about issues that impact every Nigerian.
President Bola Tinubu has issued a direct order that has sent shockwaves through Nigeria's security apparatus, demanding immediate action following the devastating attack on Kasuong Daji Market. The directive is clear and uncompromising. Find those responsible for this heinous act and bring them to justice without delay. The Minister of Defense, the Chief of Defense Staff, all service chiefs, the Inspector General of Police, and the Director General of the Department of State Services have been tasked with what many are calling an urgent mission to restore safety and confidence in the region. The Kasuong Daji market attack has left communities reeling, families shattered, and an entire nation demanding answers. Reports emerging from Sokoto State paint a grim picture of violence that erupted in the early hours, transforming a bustling marketplace into a scene of chaos and tragedy. Gunmen stormed the market, opening fire indiscriminately on innocent civilians who were simply going about their daily business. The attack was not just an assault on people, but on the very fabric of community life that markets represent in Nigerian society. Eyewitnesses have described scenes that are difficult to comprehend. Traders who had arrived early to set up their stalls for the day found themselves running for their lives. The sound of gunfire echoed through the market as people scrambled for safety, many leaving behind their goods, their livelihoods, and in some tragic cases, their loved ones. The attackers did not stop at the shooting. Multiple individuals were abducted during the raid, adding another layer of anguish to an already traumatic situation. Families are now living in a state of suspended terror, not knowing whether their relatives are alive or what conditions they might be enduring. The numbers are still being confirmed, but initial reports suggest that dozens of people lost their lives in this attack. The injured have been rushed to nearby hospitals, many of which are struggling to cope with the sudden influx of patients requiring urgent medical attention. Healthcare workers have been working round the clock, doing everything in their power to save lives, but the scale of the tragedy means that resources are being stretched to their absolute limits. What makes this attack particularly disturbing is its timing and location. Kasuong Daji is not just any market, it is a vital economic hub for the region, a place where farmers, traders, and families converge to buy and sell goods that sustain entire communities. Attacking such a space sends a message of terror that reverberates far beyond the immediate victims. It is an attempt to destabilize the social and economic foundations that hold communities together. And President Tinubu's response indicates that the government understands the gravity of this threat. The President's directive to security agencies carries significant weight by specifically naming the Minister of Defense, the Chief of Defense Staff, all service chiefs, the Inspector General of Police, and the Director General of the Department of State Services have been tasked with what many are calling an urgent mission to restore safety and confidence in the region. The rescue mission for the abducted victims has been designated as urgent, which means that security forces are expected to deploy all available resources to locate and safely return those who were taken. This is no small task. The terrain in Sokoto State can be challenging, and those responsible for the attack likely planned their escape routes carefully. However, the combined capabilities of Nigeria's military, police, and intelligence services represent a formidable force when properly coordinated and motivated. For the families of the abducted, every moment that passes feels like an eternity. They are caught between hope and despair, praying for the safe return of their loved ones while fearing the worst. The psychological toll of such uncertainty cannot be overstated. These are mothers, fathers, children, siblings, people with dreams and aspirations who now find themselves in circumstances they never imagined. The urgency in the President's directive offers a glimmer of hope that their ordeal might soon end, but until that happens, the waiting continues. This attack also raises broader questions about security in the northwest region. Sokoto State, along with neighboring areas, has experienced periodic violence from various armed groups over recent years. The pattern of attacks on soft targets like markets, schools, and villages indicates a deliberate strategy to create fear and undermine government authority. Each attack tests the resolve of security forces and the government's commitment to protecting its citizens. President Tinubu's response to this particular incident will be watched closely, not just by Nigerians, but by observers across West Africa and beyond. The international community has begun to take notice as well. Security analysts and human rights organizations are monitoring the situation, understanding that instability in Nigeria has implications for the entire region. The country's position as Africa's most populous nation and largest economy means that what happens within its borders often has ripple effects throughout the continent. If you have been following our coverage and finding these updates valuable, this would be a great time to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss important developments like these. We work hard to bring you the latest information as events unfold, and your support through likes and subscriptions helps us continue this work. The challenge facing Nigeria's security agencies is multifaceted. They must not only track down the perpetrators of this specific attack, but also work to prevent future incidents. This requires intelligence gathering, community engagement, adequate equipment, and personnel who are properly trained and motivated. The directive from President Tinubu provides the political backing and authorization for aggressive action, but translating that into operational success on the ground requires careful planning and execution. Communities in the affected areas are calling for more than just reactive responses to attacks. They want sustained security presence, economic development that provides alternatives to violence, and justice systems that hold perpetrators accountable. The cycle of attack, outrage, promises, and then gradual return to normalcy has repeated too many times, leaving people skeptical about whether real change is possible. This moment presents an opportunity for the government to demonstrate that it can break that cycle and deliver lasting security improvements. As this situation continues to develop, we will be monitoring all available sources to bring you the latest updates. The coming days will be critical as security forces pursue leads and work to locate the abducted victims. For now, the people of Sokoto State and indeed all Nigerians are watching, waiting and hoping that justice will be served and their fellow citizens will be safely returned home.
A devastating attack has shaken the community of Katsina State as armed bandits stormed a village, leaving 2 people dead and 6 others injured in what residents are describing as yet another terrifying ordeal. The incident, which occurred in the early hours, has once again brought the issue of insecurity in Nigeria's northwest region to the forefront of national conversation. Eyewitnesses report that the attackers arrived suddenly, catching villagers off guard as many were preparing for the day ahead. The bandits, who were heavily armed, began shooting indiscriminately, causing panic and chaos as residents scrambled for safety. The 2 victims who lost their lives were reportedly caught in the crossfire as they attempted to flee to safety. Their identities have been withheld by authorities pending notification of extended family members, but local sources indicate that both individuals were well-known members of the community who contributed significantly to village life. The 6 injured persons have been rushed to nearby medical facilities, where they are currently receiving treatment. Medical personnel attending to them have described their conditions as ranging from stable to critical, with some having sustained gunshot wounds that required immediate surgical intervention. Katsina State has been grappling with banditry for several years now, and this latest attack adds to a growing list of incidents that have left communities living in constant fear. The bandits, who often operate in large groups, have been known to target rural villages where security presence is minimal and response times are typically slow. These criminal groups have evolved from cattle rustlers into well-organized armed gangs that terrorize communities through kidnappings, killings, and large-scale theft of livestock and other valuable property. The Northwest region, which includes states like Katsina, Zamfara, Sokoto, and Kaduna, has become a hotbed of bandit activity, with thousands of lives lost and countless others displaced from their ancestral homes. What makes this situation particularly distressing is the frequency of these attacks. Villagers in affected areas often describe living in a state of perpetual anxiety, never knowing when the next raid might occur. Many have abandoned their farms, which has had a direct impact on food production in a region that is traditionally known for agriculture. Schools have been forced to close in some areas, and economic activities have ground to a halt as people prioritize survival over commerce. The psychological toll on residents, especially children who witness these violent incidents, cannot be overstated. Security agencies have been working to combat the menace, but the bandits' knowledge of the terrain and their apparent access to sophisticated weapons have made the task incredibly challenging. There have been numerous military operations in the region, some of which have resulted in the neutralization of bandit camps and the rescue of kidnapped victims. However, the bandits continue to regroup and launch fresh attacks, suggesting that the root causes of the problem go beyond mere law enforcement. If you are finding this information valuable and you want to stay updated on important news like this, make sure you hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss an update from us. The federal and state governments have implemented various strategies to address the crisis. These include peace negotiations with some bandit groups, deployment of additional security personnel to hotspot areas, and efforts to cut off the supply of weapons and ammunition to the criminals. Some state governments have also banned the sale of petroleum products in jerry cans and restricted motorcycle movements in certain areas, as bandits often use motorcycles for their operations. Despite these measures, attacks continue to occur with alarming regularity, leading many to question the effectiveness of current security strategies. Community leaders in Katsina have been vocal about their frustration with the security situation. They argue that villagers are left vulnerable and unprotected, forced to fend for themselves when attacks occur. Some communities have resorted to forming local vigilante groups to provide some level of defense, but these groups are often outgunned by the bandits. The call for more robust security infrastructure, including the establishment of permanent security posts in vulnerable villages, has been repeated time and again, with residents pleading for a more proactive rather than reactive approach to security. The humanitarian impact of banditry in the Northwest cannot be ignored. Thousands of people have been displaced from their homes and are currently living in internally displaced persons camps, where conditions are far from ideal. These camps struggle with inadequate food supplies, poor sanitation, and limited access to healthcare and education. Women and children are particularly vulnerable in these situations, facing increased risks of exploitation and abuse. International humanitarian organizations have raised concerns about the deteriorating situation and have called for increased support for affected communities. This recent attack in Katsina village serves as another grim reminder that the battle against banditry is far from over. It highlights the urgent need for a comprehensive approach that addresses not just the symptoms but the underlying causes of the crisis. Issues like poverty, unemployment, lack of education, and competition over scarce resources like land and water have all been identified as contributing factors to the rise of banditry in the region. Any lasting solution must tackle these fundamental challenges while simultaneously strengthening security measures to protect vulnerable communities. As we continue to follow this developing story, our thoughts remain with the families of those who lost their lives and with the injured who are fighting for their lives in hospital. We also stand with the
Good afternoon. Devastating news is emerging from Adamawa State in northeastern Nigeria, where the Islamic State West Africa province has burned down a Christian village and issued a chilling ultimatum to believers across the nation. According to security analyst Brant Phillip, who broke the story on Thursday, ISWAP released images showing flames engulfing a Christian community in Adamawa alongside a statement that should send shivers down anyone's spine. The terrorist group declared that all Christians in Nigeria are now legitimate targets and offered them only two choices to spare their blood: convert to Islam or pay the jizya tax directly to ISWAP. This is not just another attack. This is religious persecution in its rawest form, and what makes it even more disturbing is the timing and the message behind it. Security experts believe this brutal assault is direct retaliation for recent joint military operations. Just 5 days before this village was set ablaze, President Donald Trump announced that United States forces had launched airstrikes against terrorist positions in Sokoto state, working hand in hand with the Nigerian military to take down ISWAP strongholds. The terrorists are now responding by targeting the most vulnerable, innocent Christian villagers who have nothing to do with military operations but are being punished simply because of their faith. The images released by ISWAP show homes and possibly churches reduced to ashes, while families who built their lives in these communities watch everything they own disappear in flames. Imagine waking up to armed militants storming your village, telling you that your only options are to abandon the faith you have held your entire life or pay money to the very people terrorizing you. For many Christians in this region, their faith is not negotiable. It is the foundation of who they are, and no amount of threats will make them bow to extremist demands. But the cost of that conviction is becoming increasingly unbearable as villages burn and families scatter into displacement camps with nothing but the clothes on their backs. What is particularly troubling about this situation is how ISWAP is now openly declaring all Nigerian Christians as targets. This is not about a localized dispute or a fight over resources. This is systematic religious targeting, and it represents a dangerous escalation in the tactics being used by these terrorists. The jizya tax they mention is a historical Islamic levy that was imposed on non-Muslims living under Islamic rule, but in this context it is being weaponized as a tool of extortion and intimidation. Pay us or die, convert or face destruction. These are the choices being forced upon Christian communities who have already endured more than a decade of violence from Boko Haram, ISWAP, and other extremist groups operating in the Northeast. American lawmakers are now weighing in on the crisis. United States Congressman Riley Moore from West Virginia did not mince words when he responded to the reports on social media. He stated that if there were any remaining doubts that Christians in Nigeria are being targeted specifically for their faith in Jesus Christ, this incident should end that debate completely. Moore rejected arguments that try to explain away the violence as being about land disputes, climate change, or economic competition. He made it clear that this is about religious persecution, plain and simple. The congressman noted that ISIS tactics are being replicated in Nigeria, with terrorists telling Christians they can spare their blood if they convert, but he expressed confidence that Nigerian believers will not bend the knee to anyone except their Lord and Savior. The international reaction highlights just how serious this situation has become. When United States politicians are speaking out about attacks on Christians in a specific Nigerian state, it means the world is watching and the pressure is mounting on both the Nigerian government and international partners to do something concrete about the deteriorating security situation. The joint airstrikes that happened just days before this village was burned show that military cooperation is happening. But the question everyone is asking is whether it is enough and whether it is happening fast enough to protect vulnerable communities before more lives are lost. For those living in Adamawa State and across the Northeast, the fear is constant and the threat is real.
churches across Adamawa State had to cancel their New Year crossover services, those special late-night prayer gatherings where Christians traditionally welcome the New Year because of credible security threats. When people cannot even gather to pray without fearing for their lives, you know the situation has reached a critical point. The Adamawa state government also cancelled its official New Year celebration, showing that the threat level was high enough to shut down both religious and civic activities. Unfortunately, the warnings proved accurate. On New Year's Eve, 7 people were killed in an attack on the Bomdili community in Plateau State, adding to the growing list of Christian casualties as 2025 ended and 2026 began. This pattern of holiday violence is not new. During Christmas 2024, 11 Christians were killed in Benue State by militants. The Christmas before that, in 2023, saw coordinated attacks in Plateau State that left more than 140 people dead and 300 injured across multiple Christian villages. These are not random acts of violence. They are carefully timed attacks designed to strike when Christians are gathered together, when they are celebrating their most important religious occasions, when they should feel safest among their own community. The psychological impact of this targeting cannot be overstated. For the families now displaced from the burned village in Adamawa State, the future looks uncertain. They join more than 7 million Nigerians who require urgent humanitarian assistance after 15 years of relentless insecurity in the region. These are people who have lost their homes, their livelihoods, their sense of security, and in many cases, their loved ones. Children are growing up in displacement camps instead of attending school. Women who once farmed their own land are now dependent on aid organizations for their next meal. Men who provided for their families are now struggling with the trauma of watching everything they built turn to ash while being powerless to stop it. If you are learning about this crisis for the first time, or if you want to stay informed about important developments like this, please hit that subscribe button right now and turn on your notifications. We are committed to bringing you the stories that matter, the ones that mainstream media sometimes overlooks, and we need your support to keep doing this work. The question facing Nigeria right now is what comes next. Will there be justice for the families whose village was burned? Will security forces finally establish a presence strong enough to deter these attacks before they happen, rather than responding after the damage is done? Will the international community follow through with meaningful support beyond statements of concern? And most importantly, will Nigerian Christians be able to live in peace and practice their faith without fear of being burned out of their homes? These are the conversations we need to be having as citizens, as believers, and as human beings who care about justice and human dignity. The people of Adamawa State deserve answers, they deserve protection, and they deserve to know that their lives matter just as much as anyone else's in this country.
Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has just made an announcement that is sending shock waves across Nigeria and the entire African continent. In a public speech delivered on Wednesday that was posted to his official YouTube channel, Netanyahu declared that Israel is opening what he calls a new front, and this time it is focused on protecting Christian communities facing threats in parts of Africa and the Middle East, with Nigeria specifically mentioned as one of the countries where this initiative will be directed. This announcement came during a meeting Netanyahu held with leaders from the United States evangelical community, where he emphasized what he described as shared values between Israel and Christian communities worldwide. Speaking to an audience he identified as Christian Zionists, Netanyahu explained that Israel had recently fought what he called a 7-front war and had emerged largely victorious, but now an additional challenge has arisen that requires urgent attention. According to the Prime Minister, this new front is centered on what he calls the battle for hearts and minds, particularly among young people around the world. Netanyahu specifically mentioned that Christian communities are facing persecution in several countries, including Syria, Lebanon, Nigeria, and Turkey. He claimed that Israel is uniquely positioned to protect these communities and ensure their growth and safety.
The Israeli leader went further to announce that Israel is joining efforts to establish what he described as a coalition of countries similar to a framework like the United Nations, aimed at supporting Christian communities worldwide that are under threat. This coalition would focus on intelligence cooperation in Africa and direct support in the Middle East. For Nigeria, this announcement carries enormous weight because of the security situation that Christians in various parts of the country have been facing for years. The northern regions of Nigeria have experienced devastating attacks on Christian communities, with reports indicating thousands of deaths in recent years. These attacks have been carried out by various militant groups, including Boko Haram and factions associated with the Islamic State. Churches have been targeted, farmlands have been destroyed, and entire villages have been displaced, creating a humanitarian crisis that has demanded international attention. If you are finding this information valuable and want to stay updated on developments like this that directly affects Nigeria and the African continent, make sure you hit that subscribe button right now so you do not miss any future updates. What makes this Israeli initiative particularly significant is the potential for security cooperation and intelligence sharing. Israel is globally recognized for its advanced security technologies, counter-terrorism expertise, and intelligence capabilities. If this new front translates into concrete partnerships with Nigeria and other African nations, it could mean access to training programs for security forces, advanced surveillance systems, and strategic intelligence that could help protect vulnerable communities. Netanyahu outlined a vision that includes identifying what he described as the main global threats to what he calls Judeo-Christian traditions, specifically pointing to radical forces led by Iran and groups associated with extremist ideologies. The timing of this announcement is also quite interesting because it comes at a moment when discussions about religious persecution have been gaining more attention internationally. Just weeks ago, there were reports of debates in the United States about designating Nigeria as a country of particular concern due to what some officials have described as existential threats facing Christians in the country. While the Nigerian government has disputed some of these characterizations, the reality on the ground in affected communities tells a story of ongoing violence and displacement that cannot be ignored. For everyday Nigerians, especially those living in communities that have experienced these attacks firsthand, the critical question will be whether this Israeli announcement leads to real improvements in security and protection. People want to see tangible results that will allow them to return to their homes, worship without fear, and rebuild their lives. Diplomatic statements and international pledges are important, but what matters most is practical action on the ground that changes the security situation for vulnerable populations. This initiative also raises important questions about how it will be implemented and what form the cooperation will take. Will it involve direct military assistance, or will it focus more on intelligence sharing, training programs, and technology transfer? How will the Nigerian government respond to this offer of support, and what are the implications for national sovereignty and foreign policy? These are questions that will need to be addressed through diplomatic channels in the coming weeks and months. From a regional perspective, Israel's decision to establish this new front could influence how other countries approach security cooperation in Africa. If Israel increases its engagement in providing support to protect religious minorities, it might encourage other nations to also step up their involvement in addressing similar challenges across the continent. However, it could also create diplomatic tensions with countries that have different political alignments or that view increased Israeli involvement in Africa with suspicion. The broader context of this announcement is Israel's long-standing relationship with African nations, which has historically been built on economic ties, agricultural cooperation, and security partnerships. Nigeria itself has significant trade relationships with Israel, and there have been various levels of diplomatic engagement over the years. What Netanyahu is proposing now appears to be an expansion of these relationships into a more explicit focus on protecting religious communities, which could reshape the nature of Israel-Africa relations in fundamental ways.
Netanyahu also emphasized during his speech that Israel had successfully fought what he described as multiple fronts in recent conflicts, but that this new battle for hearts and minds represents a different kind of challenge. He stressed that the voice of faith must be heard and that what he calls terrorism must be confronted and defeated rather than simply understood or negotiated with. This framing suggests that Israel sees this initiative not just as a humanitarian effort, but as part of a broader strategic approach to countering what it perceives as threats to shared values. The reaction from Christian communities in Nigeria and across Africa will be an important factor in how this initiative develops. Many Christians in Nigeria have been calling for greater international support and intervention to address the security challenges they face, so there may be significant support for any practical assistance that helps improve protection for vulnerable populations. At the same time, the political sensitivities around foreign intervention in domestic security matters means that any cooperation will need to be carefully structured to respect Nigerian sovereignty and work within existing government frameworks. Hit that like button if you are getting valuable insights from this breakdown, and drop your thoughts in the comments about what this could mean for Nigeria. As this story continues to develop, it will be crucial to watch how the Nigerian government responds to this Israeli initiative and what specific forms of cooperation might emerge. The announcement represents a potentially significant shift in how international actors engage with security challenges facing religious minorities in Africa, and Nigeria finds itself at the center of this developing situation. Whether this leads to meaningful improvements in security for affected communities or remains primarily a diplomatic initiative will become clearer in the weeks and months ahead. Make sure you stay connected to this channel for all the latest updates on this story and other important developments affecting Nigeria and the wider African region.